bosses are notoriously unforgiving when it comes to mistakes. I fear El Guardo was working together with none other than El Chapo at the time. He too was climbing the ranks of the Guadalajara cartel, and he would go on to form the ruthless Sinaloa cartel's arrest. But El Guardo had a third partner, Abayardo El Bolito Radamosa, and one day, El Guardo and El Bolito couldn't resist the temptation to keep a cargo, or they lost one. Whichever story you believe, but this shipment was worth millions of dollars, and the cartel was very strict when it came to doing as your bosses told you. When the Arellano Feliz brothers found out, they executed El Bolito on the spot. El Guardo survived the attack, but he could never convince his bosses of his innocence. Benjamin and Ramon Arellano Felix tried to persuade their cousin, El Padrino, to decrease of El Guardo's power within the cartel, but El Guardo's discipline and his collaboration with El Chapo made El Padrino think again. However, it was exactly El Guardo's power and connections that ultimately led to his arrest in 1978. In 1978, El Guardo was arrested by the DEA in Arizona and sentenced to 8 years in prison. Shortly after he got out, El Padrino was finally arrested. The Guadalajara cartel came to an end, but it wouldn't be without a bang. The Guadalajara cartel was massive, so it split into smaller factions. Some of these spread a rumor that El Chapo and El Guardo plotted to bring El Padrino down. By 1989, there was an all-out war with El Guardo and El Chapo against the Arellano Felix brothers. This is better known as the drug war between the Sinaloa and the Tijuana cartels. Of course, they weren't just fighting over principle. They both wanted control over the Sonora region, which is a must for smuggling into the U.S. But the Arellano Felix brothers never forgave El Guardo for the lost shipment back in the 1970s, so there was a personal vendetta here as well. The Arellano Felix brothers hired a Venezuelan man called Rafael Cabell Moreno. He was said to be handsome and mysterious, with great flirting skills. Initially, Moreno was supposed to seduce El Guardo's sister, but the mission got much darker on the way. Through El Guardo's sister, Moreno befriended his wife, Guadalupe Leja. Guadalupe had 2 young children to take care of, but it had been a long time since she'd felt admired and desired. El Guardo spent most of his time overseeing sketchy deals and bribing officials. He had no time for romantic love. So when Moreno came along, Guadalupe was very susceptible to charm. Within 2 weeks, she was ready to start a new life with him. They ran off to San Francisco, and Moreno convinced her to take out $7 million from the family's San Diego account. When El Guardo realized what was going on, he had a jealous rage and destroyed every valuable in their home. But he didn't yet understand the true horror of the situation. Soon after Guadalupe arrived at the San Francisco hotel, Moreno cut her throat. Then he beheaded her and preserved her head in a cooler. He would send it to El Guardo. 15 days later, Moreno took El Guardo's 2 children, 5-year-old Hector Jesus and 4-year-old Natalie, to San Cristobal, Venezuela, on top of the Concordia Bridge. He threw the 2 children off the bridge and filmed everything so that their father could watch. Imagine receiving your wife's head and a tape of your...
Killing the child? That's pathetic. Killing innocent 2 children. That's just wrong. I'm a psychopath, but I have my limits. I will not hurt children. Well, 10-year-olds, 9-year-olds. Sure, 15-year-olds like me. 16, 17, 18, 19. But like 12, 11, 9, 5, you know what I mean. Nah, I will not.
Children's murders as a gift from the cartel. This was the end of El Guardo as far as he was concerned. He didn't care what happened next. He just wanted revenge. First, he had Moreno's 3 children assassinated. Then, he had Moreno arrested and paid someone to kill him while in prison. But it didn't end there.
It is also attributed to El Guardo the murders of Rafael Clavel's lawyer, Jesus Gies, of 9 Arellano family members, of the activist for the defense of human rights, Norma Corona Salazar, and 3 students of Venezuelan nationality registered in the Autonomous University of Sinaloa.
On November 8, 1992, El Guardo also ordered a bloody attack on the Jalisco nightclub, where he believed the Arellano Felix brothers to be that night. 10 people died, but Benjamin and Ramon escaped. In May of the next year, El Guardo also ordered the shooting of Cardinal Juan Jesus Posadas Ocampo. He was found dead in his car at the Guadalajara airport. El Guardo was helped in his revenge quest by El Chapo and El Mayo. The three of them were the founders of the Sinaloa cartel. Within a few years, Ramon Arellano Felix would be dead, and his brother Benjamin would be in prison. The Tijuana cartel would become small and insignificant compared to the mighty Sinaloa cartel. But El Guardo's time in the spotlight would end pretty soon. Amidst his bloody quest, El Guardo tried to honor the deaths of his children and his wife. He commissioned a painting that depicted his family as angels, and he built a mausoleum in Humaya, Culiacan. But do these Christian efforts balance out the pain, suffering, and bloodshed spread to the cartel and their families? In the eyes of the authorities, the answer was no. By the mid-1990s, El Guardo was a wanted man in Mexico. In 1993, El Chapo was arrested for the first time. For El Guardo, this came with a silver lining. He would gain even more power within the Sinaloa cartel. Now, El Guardo was a co-ruler of the cartel, alongside El Mayo. He wore snakeskin boots and drove everywhere with 7 sicarios and 33 police officers. He had his own diamond-encrusted gold pistol. He felt invincible. He had emerged victorious from a bloody war that destroyed his family. But nothing lasts forever, and the highs of cartel life are always short-lived. The higher you are in the pyramid, the more enemies you make, including the police. Remember how many people El Guardo maimed and killed in the early 1990s? He wasn't going to be free forever. On June 22nd, 1995, El Guardo was on a private plane on his way to a wedding, but the pilot went off route and lost precious gas in the process. The plane crashed into the mountains between the states of Nayarit and Jalisco. Enraged and used to getting things his way, El Guardo killed the pilot and co-pilot and stuffed their bodies into sleeping bags. He found a hideout where he could recover from his injuries and wait for his army to rescue him. But the Mexican army got there first. They identified and arrested him on the spot. El Guardo was sentenced to 7 years for possession of cocaine. He was sent to a maximum security prison in Puente Grande, Jalisco, where he had the opportunity to meet again with his old partner, El Chapo. El Chapo escaped Puente Grande in 2001. El Guardo was supposed to be released the following year, but he would never walk free again. In 2002, an arrest warrant for extradition by the United States would arrive in Mexico. El Guardo couldn't leave Puente Grande until his extradition, so he was their prisoner for 5 more years, until 2007, when he was finally sent to the
Fuck
U.S.
Americans.
Initially, El Guardo was incarcerated in Phoenix, Arizona prison, but within a year, he was sent to ADX Florence, the United States' highest security prison, which is also where El Chapo is currently serving his life sentence. That's right, El Guardo and El Chapo are once again prison mates, but ADX Florence
Fuck
is
the
not like other
Mexicans
prisons.
too, and
In fact,
taxes.
it has been criticized by human rights activists for violating the most basic rights. Prisoners spend 23 hours a day alone in their concrete walls with just a small black and white TV
Go
and
to
radio.
country
Their
living
spare
away.
hour is also spent alone,
Round
shackled,
4.
and heavily supervised by guards. Only during their last year of the Florence Supermax can prisoners
Living away
interact
for
with
life.
fellow inmates and eat together.
Fuck
This might be
Mexican.
El Chapo's life
Fuck
forever,
America.
but in June 2016, El Guardo was
They ain't
released from
shit.
prison on good behavior. He was only
Living
56,
away
he had a
where I'm
very poor vision,
My home
missing
country.
teeth, and a painful
Living
hernia.
away.
Yeah, 2 decades in prison
And no
never helped
bronze.
anyone's health. El Guardo's story is a tragic one. He sought work in the cartel for some quick cash and ended up intertwined with the most dangerous people in Mexico. Then, he became one of the most dangerous people and suffered horrific consequences. His quest for revenge only brought about more suffering. An eye for an eye only prolongs the pain. At the moment, El Guardo's whereabouts are unknown. Former cartel members famously stay in the shadows after getting released from prison. If they help the authorities in any way, there is serious retaliation danger. El Guardo is now in his early 60s. He still has time to live a peaceful life and try to make up for the damages he's caused. But will he ever be able to move on from the tragedy of his life? Hey, thanks for watching. Throughout his decade with 2 cartels, El Pozolero, or the Soup Man, dissolved up to 1,000 bodies in vats of acid. Breaking Bad is nothing compared to real life. When he was finally arrested, a horrible stench filled his room. He told the police officers he was making seafood soup. Yeah, that wasn't seafood soup. So abstain from eating any kind of soup as you watch this outrageous video and delve into the story of Santiago Meza, aka El Pozolero. Movies often show the glamorous side of cartels, the money, power,
Yeah.
and status that only the
Movies
top of the
do.
pyramid gets to live in. But behind the scenes,
Hollywood
things
is
are as
fake.
dark, brutal, and downright gruesome as cartels disposing of their enemies' bodies. Santiago Meza Lopez had a modest background. He was a poor farmer's boy and liked animals. In fact, it was his love of animals that brought him to the cartels. That and a desperate need for cash. Santiago started working with the Ariane Felix cartel in 1996. He tended to their horses and did their masonry work. It was honest work that simply paid better compared to anything he could do on his farm. But you know how cartels promise you endless riches for just a little bit of dirty work? That's always the hook. Make a threat or carry out a sketchy drug deal. Within months, you'll be rich. Sadly, Santiago fell into this trap, and before long, he was conducting narcotics deals for Ariano Felix. First, he was their dealer. Then, he was their drug office keeper. He was disciplined and dedicated, and Felix encouraged this by promoting him. As he surveilled the depots around Tijuana toward the end of the century, the Arellano cartel started a bloody war with the notorious Sinaloa cartel. Both cartels wanted control over the same trafficking routes into the U.S., but there's nothing simple about cartel fights. Constant attacks, kidnappings, and assassinations were terrorizing Mexico. A staggering 24,000 people lost their lives during just a few short years. But what do you do with all the bodies if you're a cartel boss and you don't want the police on your tail? In a really creepy twist, the thousands of victims opened up a job opportunity for Santiago. In the late 1990s, the Ariano Felix brothers, Ramon and Benjamin, invited Santiago to a secluded spot. They asked him to do a little experiment with them. They handed him a leg of beef and asked him to toss the leg into a container. The vat was filled with caustic soda, also known as lye, mixed with water and some other chemicals. They left Santiago with the container and told him to watch over the beef while they took care of other business. A few hours later, Santiago would confirm their experiment worked out the way they had intended it to. The leg of beef was completely dissolved, only coloring the liquid inside to the container a crimson red. It was gross, but it was nothing compared to what was about to happen. 6 months later, the Ariano Felix brothers revealed to Santiago what the experiment was about. He was going to carry out their dirtiest work, dissolve their enemies into vats of lye. The brothers had asked for advice from foreign cartel members about disposing of corpses. They were in over their heads, quite literally, in war victims, and simply dumping them in shady spots wasn't working anymore. The police were on the lookout for any cartel mistake, so they could arrest the Tijuana cartel bosses at the end of the war. Now, Ramon and Benjamin had Santiago dissolve his first human body. Several henchmen were watching. If this worked, this would be their future method for all their enemies. Santiago undressed the body and stuffed it into a large drum, filled with the same mixture as before, except this time there were 200 liters of it. The drum's burner was lit up, and the mixture started to froth. Santiago left it overnight to cook. When he returned to the vat in the morning, there was no body inside, just a red sludge and some tiny bone fragments decorating the bottom of the container. El Pozolero was born. Before you ask, no, Pozolero doesn't literally mean soup man. It comes from pozole, a traditional Mexican soup made with corn and meat. I know, El Pozolero ruined the dish forever. After El Pozolero notified the Ariano Felix brothers of their successful experiment, they called in their truck driver. He took the container and drove it to a nearby canyon in the dead of night. He tossed the remains in there and carried the container back to the cartel headquarters. This would be the Tijuana cartel's preferred method of dealing with their bodies, and Santiago became their chief cleaner. El Pozolero was in charge of everything: buying oil containers, caustic soda, latex gloves, and gas masks. Everything about this job was simply horrifying, and El Pozolero seemed to be completely desensitized to it. Maybe he was even getting a kick out of it. Now he was working directly under drug lord Teodoro Garcia Cimental, aka El Teo. He would send El Pozolero a text message with a location every time he had a new body that he needed to get rid of. El Pozolero would arrive at the specific location, but it wouldn't be a simple exchange. A cohort of cars would pull up, and he would be called to find out which car the body was in. Then, 2 henchmen would help Pozolero carry the body into his vehicle, and he would drive off to his lab. There he would take care of the body. Sometimes it would be several bodies simultaneously. When he was done, he would take the bone remains and throw them into huge underground pits. By now, El Pozolero had his own graveyard, and business was booming, in the worst sense of the word. But as always, nothing lasts forever. El Teo was a ruthless, violent, and headstrong man. This caused several hiccups between him and the Arellano Felix brothers. In 2008, it all came to a boiling point. El Teo decided to switch sides and join the biggest rival cartel around, El Chapo and El Mayo's Sinaloa. And since El Pozolero was his man, he took him with him. This is how El Pozolero became the Sinaloa cartel's chief body disposer too. This is creepy on so many levels. He was dissolving the bodies of his former colleagues, but he didn't seem to care. El Pozolero made $600 a week. In his time and place, this was excellent money. He could afford almost anything he wanted, and he had achieved a disturbing kind of stardom in the cartel.
In the negotiations with the government, with politicians, right? They create these kind of chaos to go and sit with the local politicians and say, like, okay, do you want more, or shall we negotiate this stuff?
It really seems like there is no end to El Mincho's lust for power. If the authorities give him what he wants, he will only militarize some more and make CJ&G more powerful. If they decline, he will continue to kill officers and civilians until they do. Will El Mincho ever get caught? Will CJ&G's insatiable bloodlust ever be put to an end? Some of the most dangerous drug lords in business today are the ones we don't talk about. Kinney Jung-Ang Chin is one of them. If you look up his name online, you find one picture of him and the fact that he's one of the most wanted men by the DEA. For an aspiring star, internet anonymity would be the worst nightmare, but for a brutal kingpin, it's the dream. No one knows who you are, where you are, and why you're sought out by the authorities. Kinney Jung-Ang Chin is wanted by the DEA for the huge quantity of heroin he distributes in the United States. And needless to say, when you control a large narcotics business, this comes with threats, violence, and even assassinations. But there's an even darker side to Jung-Ang Chin's story. Sadly, he employs minors to do his dirty work. This is wrong on so many levels, but for him, it's just business. Minors, especially if they're illegal immigrants, are much easier to corrupt with small money and much more unaware of the dangers of trafficking. If they end up arrested or even dead, it's not Chin who suffers. In his mind, they're just expendable. So you see why Chin is a wanted man, but he's so well hidden, it might be a while before the DEA finally gets their hands on him. This is Ramon Pascual Cipriano. He may not be the most dangerous drug lord on the list, but he is the youngest. He was born in 1997. As of 2022, he's just 25 years old, and yet he's one of the most wanted men in the U.S. He resides in California, and it's from there that he conducts business on behalf of the Sinaloa cartel. Indeed, the notorious Sinaloa cartel has people everywhere, and they go to extreme lengths to ensure their ever-steady ascent. Cipriano is in charge of white powder distribution on the West Coast, but he is slowly climbing the ranks of the cartel, so he already has people working for him, wreaking havoc and spreading violence to protect him and his cartel. As he is still on the run and eluding the DEA, he could still grow in the Sinaloa network in the U.S., making them more powerful than ever. Cipriano can be seen as a symbol of just how dangerous and brutal narcotics gangs are in general. The cartels recruit people who will do anything to have money and power. Violent, vengeful people who don't care for justice and even get a kick from inflicting pain. Cipriano was born in 1997. Life of unspeakable crime, and will it ever stop? As the young people grow up, they can become the new Escobar, El Chapo, or El Mayo.
Number one.
This is El Chino Antrax, or Jose Rodrigo Arachica Gamboa. He was once the Sinaloa cartel's highest-ranking assassin and a ruthless drug lord who was extremely tough, even for his fellow sicarios. Some people join the cartel from impoverished backgrounds with few job opportunities. They're not necessarily evil, they're just desperate for some quick cash. But what about those cartel members who climb the ranks and get to the top, killing and maiming on the way? Well, that's another type of cartel member. Some people have such a lust for power and money, they will literally stop at nothing. And the Sinaloa cartel is a place that encourages ruthless people to do their worst. So let's explore why El Chino was hired by the Sinaloa cartel, and how he became their most feared killer, and how he met his strange demise in 2020. Jose Rodrigo Arachica Gamboa was born in Coyoacan, Mexico on June 15th, 1980. And unlike many of his cartel peers, Jose did not grow up poor. In fact, he was the son of a rich and educated family. So why did he join the cartel? In Jose's case, there was a geographical reason. You see, his childhood neighbor was none other than Ismael Zambada, aka El Mayo. El Mayo famously led the Sinaloa cartel from the shadows, with El Chapo as the frontman. After El Chapo's arrest, El Mayo officially took control of the cartel. But to this day, his whereabouts are unknown, and there's a $15 million reward on his head. So Jose grew up playing with El Mayo's many sons. They all grew up into young men, and they started their own families. But when Jose was married with kids, he began to struggle financially. So who other to ask for help than El Mayo's sons? Vicente Zambada, El Mayo's oldest, immediately offered Jose a job as a bodyguard for the Sinaloa cartel. Jose started small, with minute errands for the cartel, but I don't imagine he was doing the groceries. As a cartel bodyguard, small errands include beating people up and threatening them into submission. So Jose got engulfed in a world of violence, and he started to like it. Up until 2008, he worked for the Sinaloa cartel leaders, beating, then even killing their enemies. But 2008 was a fateful year, as there was a big rift in the cartel. Beltran Leyva cartel separated from the Sinaloa. By now, Jose had a nasty thirst for blood, and he wanted more power than his simple bodyguard job offered him. So he seized the opportunity and created his own armed squadron, Los Antrax. Now he was El Chino Antrax, which means the Chinese anthrax. No one really foresaw that El Chino Antrax was harboring his mind. You wouldn't really think a young family man from a well-off family would want to dismember people and leave their bodies strung up on bridges. But sadly, that's all true. Under El Chino's command, Los Antrax were pure evil. They not only targeted the Sinaloa cartel's enemies, they killed civilians and police officers, anyone who interfered with their violent activities, and anyone who looked at them the wrong way. El Chino Antrax wasn't alone. His most trusted man was Rene Velasquez Venezuela. He was just as nasty and bloodthirsty, and was happy to take any life as long as he could proclaim his power. So by 2010, the police were out to get them, and so were rival cartels. The first to go was El Pocho Antrax, another violent squad leader. He died in a huge shootout with the Beltran Leyva cartel in June 2010. The following year, 3 more Antrax members were arrested by the police, but they weren't jailed. They were tortured on information on the rest of the group, then killed. By the end of the year, El Chino Antrax lost one of his right-hand men, Francisco Arce Rubio, or Pancho Arce. He was playing an indoor soccer game when a rival cartel army barged in on the team and gunned down several Sinaloa and Antrax men. Pancho Arce died at the scene. This is when El Chino Antrax became scared. You would think a man as ruthless and violent as El Chino Antrax wouldn't bow down to rival cartel attacks. Cartel drug lords and squad leaders usually retaliate until every party is particularly disseminated. But in late 2011, El Chino realized he was vulnerable and asked for El Mayo's help. He figured that if El Mayo negotiated directly with the rival cartels, then Los Antrax would receive an extra layer of protection. But even though El Mayo spoke with the rival kingpins, the negotiations didn't work. Los Antrax were incredibly violent, and the only way they could be stopped was with more violence. In February 2012, Antrax soldier Roque Landeros and 3 other men were killed. The situation was even more worrying here. They hadn't been killed by rival cartels or the police. They were the victims of an international struggle within the Sinaloa cartel. El Chapo's army group was going after Los Antrax. By now, they wanted El Chino Antrax arrested too. In 2012, he was charged with conspiring to import 500 grams of methamphetamines and 5 kilos of white powder to the U.S. The DEA had listened to phone conversations between El Chino and his many traffickers over a period of 6 months, and after arresting several small fish from the Sinaloa cartel, they had enough testimonies to indict El Chino Antrax. He was concerned. The Mexican authorities, the DEA, rival cartels, and even El Chapo were fighting to have Los Antrax dissolved. Amidst all this, these are the photos of El Chino Antrax would post of himself on social media. He seemed to be completely oblivious to the fact that he was a wanted man. He even went to VIP parties in the US. This is a picture of El Chino next to Paris Hilton. He also posted pictures of himself with El Mayo's son. And if that wasn't cringy enough, here's a picture he took of his money and weapons. Then the most conspicuous photo he posted was of his skull ring. This was the symbol of Los Antrax. Now the DEA had a clear connection between him and Los Antrax. El Chino had escaped Mexican authorities for years, even with all his social media posts, because he would usually blur his face. Then El Chino even had plastic surgery and tried to alter his fingerprints, even though he wasn't showing it online. He was afraid, and he was desperate to elude the police. But when the DEA got a hold of his social media profiles, there was no escaping them. On New Year's Eve 2013, El Chino Antrax flew from Mexico to the Netherlands and landed at Amsterdam airport. The DEA knew he boarded that flight, and they alerted the Dutch authorities. They were thus on the lookout for a Mexican national wearing a glam skull ring. That day, he was arrested inside the airport. 3 days later, an FBI agent and Mexican newspapers leaked the information. El Chino Antrax was in custody. He was traveling as Norberto Siqueiros Garcia and was identified via his skull ring. He had taken the identity of a dead Mexican citizen and had even changed his appearance, but he couldn't let go of his pride. If it weren't for his anthrax ring, he might have never gotten caught.
Looking for a great deal on your next trip? Compare prices and travel your way with Kayak. Now you're traveling.
El Chino was initially taken to Vught maximum security prison in the Netherlands, but the United States wanted him extradited for the plethora of drug trafficking charges. On January 8th, the U.S. Department of Treasury sanctioned El Chino under the Foreign Narcotics Kingpin Designated Act. Yep, there is such a thing. This basically meant that all his U.S. assets were frozen and he could no longer make deals from jail. Through this act, a big plot twist was revealed. El Chino Antrax was El Mayo's army man, but he was also El Chapo's trafficking drug lord. He was working for both Sinaloa bosses. Could he be the reason for the rift between El Chapo and El Mayo? Why was El Chapo attacking Los Antrax before his arrest? On July 10th, 2014, El Chino Antrax was extradited to the U.S. The next day, during his hearing in San Diego, he pleaded not guilty to all of the charges against him. Throughout the following 6 months, El Chino's defense team continued to delay his trial and bring new evidence, so as to confuse the prosecution. His court appearances were delayed every month till a milestone in March 2015. On March 20th, El Chino pleaded guilty to conspiracy to import white powder and marijuana. There's more. He even cooperated with the U.S. government, helping them bring down several Sinaloa cartel members. Did he accept the deal that would grant him a shorter sentence, or was he feeling genuine regret about his years with the Sinaloa? Well, both might be accurate. After receiving his sentence, he told the judge. He promised the judge he would seek work in construction and home remodeling after his release. But it's also pretty clear that his cooperation with the feds earned him a good deal. El Chino was only sentenced to 7 years in prison, and since he'd already served about a year before he pleaded guilty,
He died
El
in
Chino was
prison
released in March 2020. He was supposed to serve 5 more years under probation. However, this was the beginning of the end for El Chino Antrax. Now, he was going by a different name. His face was heavily altered, and he steered clear of anyone in Mexico. He knew all too well that if he would make contact with any of his former cartel friends, he would be killed. The Sinaloa cartel is not too forgiving with rats. On May 6th, 2 months after his release, Jose was declared missing. His probation officer visited his home for their usual check-in when he noticed he had vanished from his home. He'd also left behind his cell phone. Who'd leave their phone behind in a normal state of mind these days? Something was off. As soon as the prosecutor phoned the authorities, Judge Dana Sabra, who had sentenced Jose in 2015, issued a warrant for his arrest. There was a chance he'd fled the U.S., but 3 days later, authorities discovered a much more grim scene. Jose's bloated body was lying next to his sister, Ada, and her husband, Juan Garcia, all of them dead from gunshot wounds inside her BMW. The car had been abandoned on a dirt road in Culiacan, their hometown. The car was identified as Ada's, but authorities weren't sure if El Chino was actually dead. Sometimes narcos fake their own deaths, and since the body was already severely decomposed, and El Chino had undergone plastic surgery, it wasn't easy to tell if it was really him. So the police contacted the rest of Jose's family and asked them to do the horrible task of identifying their loved ones' bodies. Did El Chino Antrax flee to Mexico, only to be killed by the cartel when they realized he was there? Or was he kidnapped from San Diego? Jose met his demise at the hands of the Sinaloa cartel. He was raised, hired, then killed by them. His whole life. Few cartel kingpins are as feared or notorious as Joaquin Guzman, aka El Chapo. He once
Yeah,
ruled the
if you
Sinaloa
don't
cartel.
know-
At his peak, he was bringing
Maybe.
in $3 billion
Thanks, baby.
each year.
Welcome.
He controlled half of the entire Mexican
He
narcotics
still had
trade.
that
He owned a
couple
couple of
now?
yachts, a fleet of
No,
Learjets,
what about
a
the water?
diamond-encrusted
Yeah,
pistol,
it still
and
had
a
the
private
water.
zoo with tigers,
Cool. Here's a couple
crocodiles,
more
and
now.
panthers. But he wasn't just a good businessman.
Thank
He
you.
was a ruthless
You're welcome.
criminal who climbed the cartel pyramid by killing, maiming,
Her
and bribing.
blunt done
So it
smoke.
was no surprise
Her
that there was a
blunt now.
$5 million reward on his head. El Chapo was arrested and sent to prison twice, but he escaped. However, after the third arrest in 2016, he was sent to a maximum security prison in the U.S., a prison so tough, no one has ever escaped. Let's explore every detail about El Chapo's Supermax prison and how the once terrifying kingpin lives his life today. When El Chapo was arrested in Guatemala in 1993, he already was a notorious criminal. He'd entered the narcotics trade at a very young age, then progressed with the help of Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, aka El Padrino, Spanish for the Godfather. He was the leader of the famous Guadalajara cartel and the godfather of all modern cartels. When El Padrino was arrested in 1989, El Chapo saw this as a great opportunity. He would grow his own cartel, the Sinaloa, and become the new leader of Mexican trafficking. In 1993, he was arrested and sentenced to 20 years in prison. But in 2001, he escaped in a prison laundry cart after bribing prison officials some $2.5 million. El Chapo lived on the run for 13 years before he was arrested again in 2014. He was sent to a maximum security prison in Mexico, but bribery and a giant fortune meant El Chapo could get away again. So he used a team to build an underground tunnel under his prison cell shower. But El Chapo couldn't just ride into the sunset. He'd escaped from prison twice, and the DEA was fighting hard to have him extradited to the U.S. and tried for his crimes on American soil. So in 2016, El Chapo was once again arrested, except this time, he was taken to the United States. You could see the fear on El Chapo's face from the very first minutes in the U.S. airport. That's probably because he knew it was game over. In 2019, he was found guilty of a number of criminal charges related to his Sinaloa kingpin status. He'd ordered hits, bribed officials, and supervised countless shipments. He was sentenced to life imprisonment in ADX Florence, Colorado. On July 19, 2019, El Chapo arrived at his Colorado prison cell. He was now inside the same prison as the Unabomber and the Oklahoma City bomber. These are super high-profile inmates that are considered particularly dangerous and prone to escaping, so their treatment inside the prison matches that. El Chapo, and as well as his fellow inmates, spend 23 hours a day inside a soundproof cell. Their only hour of spare time is thoroughly supervised. Not only are prisoners supervised by several guards during rack time, but they're also cuffed and shackled, and their torsos are chained as well. They can't run, jump, or do anything sudden. Of course, phones are also off the table. In fact, the only kind of technology available is a small black and white TV set in their cell, and inmates only receive this TV if they demonstrate a good behavior over a long period of time. El Chapo gets to watch TV if he wants, but the prison selects the programs, so no streaming or HD TV. If this sounds extreme, it's only because ADX Florence was built especially for dangerous, escape-prone convicts. ADX Florence is the highest security prison in the U.S., but it hasn't been around for a very long time. It opened its gates on November 30th, 19...
What? You know otherwise HBO or any other are the fucking government of America afraid that TV might come to life and kill the prisoners and kill the fucking whole world? If that's the case, well, we're dumbass. Here, in this country, prisons are good and juries are good. Here, we believe rehabilitation. Well, in America, they just put you in jail and say, that's it. Good luck in there, have a good one, also. And Mexico too, of course.
1994. The Florence Supermax was built as a result of several incidents in other U.S. prisons. During the 1980s, for example, security guards were stabbed to death at the Marion Federal Prison, so ADX Florence set out to make a building impossible to escape, where there are more guards than prisoners and a tight schedule that doesn't allow them to cause as much damage. This is why it's called the Alcatraz of the Rockies. ADX only hosts about 375 inmates. That's a small number if you consider the amount of effort they put into security. Gun towers surround the prison. There are several rows of razor wire fences and dozens of guards at every corner. So El Chapo won't be escaping anytime soon. But it's not just ADX Florence's security system that has people talking. It's life at the prison that's seriously debated. Here's what the warden said about the prison.
I don't know what hell is, but I do know that the assumption would be for a free person, would be pretty close to it.
For starters, the inmates spend 23 hours in solitary confinement. According to the United Nations, this qualifies as torture, worse than ignoring basic human rights. It is said that around a third of the Florence Supermax inmates suffer from severe mental illnesses, but after spending day after day in solitary confinement, the other 2/3 might discover some new mental health issues too. A 2012 lawsuit against the ADX stated,
It was alleged that years of isolation and almost no human contact had seriously eroded the social skills and the ability to adapt to ADX Florence inmates.
the only contact with the outside world is a forged window, and looking out, you can only see the sky. That way,
They're all
no
dumb.
inmate ever knows where their cell is.
Fucking
There are several
Americans,
accounts of
fucking
ADX
Australians,
Florence
and
inmates
fuck-
screaming for hours or hurting themselves as they
Fuck
simply go
Mexicans
mad
and
inside their
Americans
tiny
and
cells.
Australians
Some
and
mutilate
UK.
their bodies with razors, shards of
Because
glass,
my
sharpened
country.
chicken bones, writing
Fuck
utensils,
any
and
other
whatever other
country
objects they
because
contain.
my
One
country.
particularly creepy incident involving an inmate biting
Where
off
I'm
both
from.
his pinky fingers during a psychotic episode. Is this something he would have done in the outside world or in another prison? Or did the extreme isolation at the Florence Supermax lead to this terrifying moment? There have also been cases of inmates taking their own lives in pretty gruesome ways.
A number swallow razor blades, nail clippers, parts of radios and television, broken glass, and other dangerous objects.
The Florence Supermax
No
is
wonder
home to
they
a
wanna
big
get
number
away
of very
from that
dangerous
fucking
people. One of them is the
place.
1993 World Trade Center bomber.
Anywhere
Ramzi
is
Youssef.
better than
The
being
only
in
person
that
convicted
shit.
for the 9/11 attacks is also at ADX Florence. The Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, terrorized the U.S. with bombs for 2 decades before his arrest and transfer to the Florence Supermax, and several other infamous bombers, from the Oklahoma City bomber to the Boston Marathon bomber, are held here. But not all FDX Florence inmates are the worst of the worst. Some of them are inmates with discipline issues. They have been transferred from other prisons where they attacked fellow prisoners or guards. But the insane treatment is the same for everyone. Every inmate sleeps and spends most of their day alone in a 7 by 12-foot cell. There's a shower that works with a timer to prevent flooding, and a steel unit comprised the toilet, sink, and mirror. But the prisoners can't shower whenever they want. The shower is only turned on automatically
So
3
smoke
times a
now, don't
week.
fuck.
Inmates won't even be able to
Done,
sleep
baby?
for too long
Good
either.
girl.
The bed is literally a concrete slab with a thin mattress and a blanket. Comfort is not exactly a priority at the Florence Supermax. All furniture is made of concrete, and the toilet unit is fixed to the floor because ADX wants to prevent inmates from making DIY weapons from them. Mealtime is also rough. The inmates get food delivered straight to their cells through small double sliding doors. They eat alone, and they can't talk to other inmates down the hall. There are very few escapes from the madness of solitary confinement at Florence Supermax. For starters, there's a library, and inmates can borrow books and magazines to read in their cells. Then, there are telephone calls, but these are limited to 15 minutes a month. In other prisons, inmates can talk to their families every day, even if the calls are recorded and have a time limit. However, the ADX does allow visits up to 5 times a month, but all these visits have to be justified, and inmates are once again heavily supervised. In most prisons, solitary confinement is used as punishment for a few hours or a day. Prisoners spend time in solitary confinement for attacking people and breaking prison
Yeah,
rules.
where
But
I'm
at
from, we
Florence
don't have
Supermax,
solitary.
this is the norm. It's
We don't
an
believe in
feeling
death
just walking
penalty
down this
or
corridors, as
solitary.
former warden Robert Hood said.
The ADX is a far starker environment than any other prison I've ever seen.
In
I've
this
been to all of
country,
the federal
we don't
prisons.
believe in solitary or fucking
For the
death
first 3
penalty.
years inside the ADX,
Well, in
prisoners
America,
aren't allowed to have contact with other prisoners. Their 1 hour of
they
rest
get
time
me
is also
started.
spent alone in an
Started
empty
with
room
a
with a
fucking
pull-up
crappy
bar or a
America.
caged pen in the yard. After 3
And
years,
every
and
other
with a good
country.
behavior record, they can spend their spare hour talking to other inmates. During an inmate's last year at the prison, they get 4 spare hours each day. They can also serve their meals with fellow inmates. But all of this is impossible for El Chapo. He will be spending the rest of his life inside the Florence Supermax. As of 2022, El Chapo has been at the ADX Florence for 3 years. His wife Emma has been fighting hard to earn him a more humane treatment.
Lo que pedimos es que lo atiendan y que pues apliquen los derechos humanos con él. No estamos pidiendo algo otra cosa, solamente que lo dejen descansar.
El Chapo still has no human contact, bar the minutes spent with the prison guards. He's being kept at Range 13, the ADX block for the most dangerous criminals. He doesn't even have access to a normal shower. He gets washed with a hose, as he once dug a tunnel under his shower to escape prison. El Chapo has filed an appeal for his prison sentence. His lawyer stated,
The deprivation of sunlight and fresh air over an extensive 27-month period is causing psychological scarring. He is suffering many symptoms of distress as a result of this lengthy, unwarranted punishment.
whether his punishment is unwarranted or not, that's up for you to decide. After all, El Chapo did have lots of people killed just to have more money and power within his cartel. But what should punishment entail? Should even the worst criminals be kept in maddening conditions? According to Emma and El Chapo's lawyers, he can barely sleep because the lights and the noisy air conditioning are always on. Furthermore, he complained that the guards are constantly chatting in the hallway, making rest virtually impossible. Emma even complained that El Chapo's blood pressure is dangerously up these days, and she is worried for his life at the Florence Supermax. After the COVID-19 pandemic, visits were also suspended, so El Chapo couldn't see his family or his lawyers for a long time. At the moment, it's unclear just how much contact El Chapo is allowed with the outside world. But what's clear is that he is trying hard to escape the harsh conditions of ADX Florence. However, he won't be able to escape prison this time. Unless the appeal works, he will spend the rest of his life in the highest security prison in